Oil has fallen below $50 US a barrel. The UCP was banking on it being over $50 when they put together the recent budget. How will this really impact our economy here in Alberta? To talk more about it is the Alberta correspondent with the National Post, Tyler Dawson. Tyler, the Kenney government is pretty confident that oil will rebound, but analysts are not so sure.
Yeah, that's right. They've got some pretty optimistic projections in the budget. So this came out a week ago, and there were not a great many surprises in the budget. The one thing that did surprise reporters was some of these estimates on what's going to happen in the next few years, and there's a couple of them we can talk about. The one that you mentioned is oil prices, and on Wednesday, oil prices were about 47 US dollars per barrel. Now, in order for the Kenney government to sort of see the revenues it's expecting over the next few years, it's projecting that oil is going to be more like 58 US dollars a barrel in the next couple of years, climbing to 63 US dollars a barrel by 2023. This is almost everyone says this is a pretty optimistic assessment. We grilled the finance minister about it. He said that he's confident and he thinks that their projections are cautious. But that was a pretty big surprise to see their projections, and maybe they're trying to calm some of the jitters in the economy by saying, "Oh, look, good things are coming, good things are coming." But it was a very interesting. I don't think anyone expected to see those numbers in the budget last week.
Many people are suggesting that it'll be a miracle, Tyler, if we see $60 US a barrel again. So what happens if we don't quite reach that price? Will we see more potential cuts?
Yeah, so that's something that the Kenney government has been telegraphing in the past week. Finance Minister Travis Taves said it on Budget Day. Jason Kenney's been doing the rounds this week saying that as well. Basically, the gist of it being, if we don't get pipeline access, we don't get oil prices back up, if the economy doesn't start turning around, then there is the potential for further, they say spending restraint, of course, is how they're phrasing it. But, basically that means cuts. So you have this interesting scenario where if things don't get better, there might be more cuts, and they're also hoping for perhaps these optimistic changes in the economy over the next couple of years.
The province recently introduced some new taxes, including those on vaping and Airbnb. There's also a property tax hike coming in the neighborhood of around 3% as municipalities try and make up for a shortfall of funding.
That's right. Yeah. So, there have been a few little taxes here and there. There was an interesting development last week where after the budget came out, the Canadian Taxpayers Federation actually took a shot at the Kenney government because, of course, they've de-indexed income taxes. So the Taxpayer Federation calls this bracket creep because people are getting smaller exemptions each year. And so now there's also a 20% tax on vaping. That's both the fluids and the e-cigarette devices themselves. The Airbnb tax basically just extends taxes that are on other parts of the tourism industry, such as hotels, to Airbnb rentals. So, none of these I don't think are colossal hits to any household or family's bottom line, but they are some of the ways that the Kenney government is looking to make up a little bit of its revenue sort of shortfalls, shall we say.
Tyler, 164 provincial campgrounds and parks will be turned over to third parties to manage, plus 9 recreation areas will be closed and 11 parks will be partially closed, all in an effort, to save more money?
Yeah, and that number might surprise some. That number is $5 million is what the UCP is looking to save through these various changes. And they're sort of all over the province. There's going to be a complete closure in northern Alberta. Near Brooks, I believe we're seeing a partial closure. And so the idea is that there's going to be partnerships with some of these, where instead of the government managing campgrounds, managing these parks, they might be able to turn it over to recreation groups, community groups, things like that. We do already see a little bit of that out in sort of the Bighorn area outside of Rocky Mountain House. And I think the vision is that the government can just not spend this money and other people might step up to do it. And it's about 16,000 hectares across the province. Now, the government says these change. Yeah, so it's a lot of space, but the government says this is actually only about 1%, less than 1%, I should say, of Alberta's public lands. Now, that's unclear if that includes national parks as well as sort of provincial lands, but people are peeved. You look at the cross-country ski community in Calgary was out on Wednesday and Tuesday complaining about it. So, this is one of those small changes, small bits of money. I think that's the difficulty this government's facing with some of its cuts is you run the risk of irritating the people that have a lot of time and resources to complain about these things. And I suspect that in large part, some of the communities affected by this are those people.
A new Angus Reid poll says Jason Kenney's popularity has actually slipped below 50%, But Tyler, last time I checked, around 50 points is not that bad for a politician.
No, isn't that the truth, eh? If we were down around 30 or 20, or I think Kathleen Wynne, when she was Premier of Ontario, was in like low double digits, maybe approaching single digits. So you're certainly right about that. Kenney and the UCP have been on sort of a slow slide over the past several months in the polling. This is a drop of about 7 percentage points, I think it was, since December. Um, Early days, of course, still, we're not even at a year yet with this government. So certainly popularity is sliding. I think that people are, like what we just discussed with the parks, people starting to see and feel perhaps some of the cuts. The opposition has, I think, in the last couple months really wound itself into gear. So I think all of those things are probably taking a little bit of toll on his popularity, but we're a long way from the next election, So I can't imagine Kenney or any of his staff are really fretting all that much about polling less than a year into their mandate.
But what you're telling me maybe that the honeymoon is over?
Well, perhaps it is, yeah. I think that Jason Kenney promised a lot in the last election, and has been struggling a little bit, I would say, to frame the government's cuts as, moderate and small and not really as draconian as the NDP is making them out to be. So, and for how long were people willing to sort of listen to that or take that at face value, I think is an excellent question. So, but again, I think the honeymoon could come back if all of a sudden there's a big change. So much of his premiership right now, I think, is frankly beyond his control.
Tyler, the government is giving $250,000 to a memorial fund for the victims of the Ukrainian plane that was shot down in Iran.
Yeah, so viewers will certainly remember that news. 57 Canadians killed, 15 of them were from Alberta, and a decent chunk of those were from the University of Alberta. So there's basically a memorial scholarship fund that's been set up at the university, and the government announced this week that it would be contributing $250,000 to this memorial fund / scholarship to sort of keep the memory alive of the Edmontonians, the Albertans, the Canadians who were killed in that tragedy.
Education changes are now in a bill. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, Bill 5, I think it is. So we're starting to see some of the legislation come out that's going to implement some of the changes that you and I have discussed, that people have read about over the past several weeks, several months. So what this bill does is it has mainly there was a post-secondary education change. They're aiming for outcomes-based funding. So this bill is going to put that sort of structure into place. There is also another provision in there where if a school board wants to spend its reserve fund, it needs to run that by the provincial government first. So there has been, that little piece is a bit of a larger trend with the provincial government right now, where they're trying to get sort of lower bodies of government to clear some of this stuff with the province first. We saw some of that last year when they were discussing, trying to prevent municipalities basically from signing agreements and funding arrangements and whatnot with the federal government, and instead saying they had to come through the province. So, that's just a little, those are, not massive changes in this bill, but, we're starting to see the legislative side of the political agenda start to come together.
The Fair Deal panel has a survey where they're asking people if they support separation. That's pretty scary.
Yeah, a weird thing. And curse them, the Globe and Mail saw it before I did. But that's right. So the Fair Deal panel, as everyone knows, has been going around, and they've wrapped now, going around collecting people's thoughts on how to get a better deal for Alberta within Confederation. And so they have a survey, and on that survey it asks about separation. Now, the panel said, well, look, we heard a lot about separation when we were out doing this panel. This isn't something we can ignore. Now, they've said basically that they don't intend to recommend separation or recommend a referendum on independence of some sort, but it's included in there as part of, they've heard of it, they have to consider it, it has to go into the report in some capacity. So that's how they're explaining it. But it's just an interesting little twist in this phenomenon that just doesn't seem to go away.
So Jason Kenney brought up maybe at the Ledge, anything more that Alberta can do to kind of put the pressure on Ottawa to give Alberta more of a fair deal?
That is a good question. Well, he has talked a little bit in recent days and weeks about the carbon tax case and what he would do if they lost that. So, he still, for example, has the equalization referendum that he wants to hold on the table. And you know, in addition to this, that sort of stick portion of this, he also, when I talked to him last week, was mentioning how there might be some other sort of carbon pricing arrangement the province could enter into that you know would be more of a carrot in this situation. Whether it's some sort of cap and trade arrangement is what he suggested. Not necessarily with Quebec and whatever their cap is, but you know, so I think he's got these ideas, carrot and stick, that he's still sort of sitting on down the road.
Tyler, the province is giving a $100 million loan to combat orphan wells. How many wells are we talking about here?
Yeah, so this $100 million should help clean up about 1,000 wells, and it'll start the process on sort of assessing the cleanup on about 1,000 more. And now there is about 3,400 orphan wells in Alberta. So yeah, so this is a bit of a problem, and it's causing, you know, disagreements between environmentalists and landowners and energy companies in the province, and you know, municipalities are in on this. It's a whole mess. So this $100 million is supposed to create about 500 jobs, the province says, and sort of get this process underway. So you know, on one hand, it is an environmental policy to help clean up these orphan wells, and it's also, you know, a little bit of a, you know, FDR New Deal style kick in the pants for the economy to try and get some people to work.
Let me ask you something. When you're at the legislature, you're listening to Kenney and Notley go back and forth, and Kenney admits the fact that we shouldn't rely as heavily on the energy sector, the oil and gas industry, you know, especially over the next 20 or 30 years. Has he talked more about potentially investing more into agriculture, green technology? Where are we going to be investing a lot of our money as a province?
Yeah, you're right. You know, there was a whole little section in the budget, and the precise details escape me, but that talked about diversification of the Alberta economy. And this government is big on the diversification side of things. Now, I think where you would see the difference is perhaps on how they hope to achieve that. Of course, Rachel Notley's government had various programs for, say, craft breweries to start up and things like that, which has led to this, you know, lovely expansion of the craft beer industry in Alberta. And Kenney's government, I think, is still sort of hoping that this corporate tax cut they brought in a few months back, that's going to continue to go down. That's going to bring in some of this diversification and change. So I think, you know, it's sort of very fundamentally, that's where you see the philosophical difference between the two, and that may or may not pan out in sort of the short to medium term, I would say.
Our legislative reporter and Alberta correspondent with the National Post, Tyler Dawson, thanks again for joining me today from Edmonton.
Thanks, Hal.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks so much for watching.